Every family has its own set of dynamics, quiet expectations, silent judgments, and unspoken hierarchies. Ours was no different. I was 29 years old, living what my parents politely called a creative life, which was their way of saying they didn't understand what I did for a living. I worked in digital marketing, or as my father once phrased it, that computer thing you mess around with. My older brother Baplob was the golden child, the one who had chosen a real career path. He was a corporate lawyer at a respected firm, with a big house in the suburbs, a polished wife who fit perfectly into our family gatherings, and a reputation that made my parents beam with pride. Every time his name came up, it was said with a certain reverence, as if Baplob represented the family's greatest achievement. I had learned a long time ago to keep my financial situation private. When I started my digital agency 3 years earlier, everyone thought I was just playing around on the computer. They would laugh and say, "That's cute, Sarah, but when are you going to get a real job?" I never bothered to correct them. When I landed my first big client and the payments started rolling in, I just smiled and nodded. Over time, that small business grew first to 6 figures, then to multiple 6 figures. I had a steady stream of clients who trusted me with their brands, campaigns, and websites. But none of that mattered at home. Around my family, I still played the role of the struggling youngest daughter who had potential but hadn't quite figured things out. It was easier that way. The Thursday before Thanksgiving, I was sitting in my office, reviewing quarterly reports, when my phone rang. It was Mom. She didn't bother with greetings. "Sarah, you're bringing dessert tomorrow," she announced, her tone brisk and final. "And make sure it's store-bought this time. We don't want another disaster like your homemade pie last year." I smiled to myself. "Of course," I said, as I marked another payment on my spreadsheet. The monthly transfer to account ending in 7834 had gone through, just like it had every month for the last 3 years. She didn't know that I'd been quietly sending money to help cover her mortgage since Dad's early retirement. "And dress appropriately," Mom continued. "Baplob is bringing a new client, and we want to make a good impression. Try not to mention that job of yours too much." I bit back a laugh. "Got it, Mom." That evening I stood in front of my closet, deciding what to wear. I picked out a simple black dress, elegant but understated. Nothing that would draw questions or make anyone wonder how I could afford it. I'd learned to dress down for family gatherings, to match the version of me they believed in. Modest, struggling, uncertain. My drive to their house in Maple Heights took about 25 minutes. I lived downtown in what they assumed was a cheap apartment. In reality, my loft had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river, a modern kitchen, and a rent higher than their mortgage. But they never visited, and I never corrected them. Let them think what they wanted. I pulled up in front of their perfectly maintained 2-story home at exactly 5:30 p.m. The place looked like it belonged on a magazine cover. Mom had recently repainted the living room, a soft cream color, and installed new hardwood floors. The kitchen had been upgraded too. Stainless steel appliances, marble counters, everything gleaming. As soon as I stepped inside, I heard Dad's familiar booming voice. "There she is. Our little entrepreneur." The word entrepreneur rolled off his tongue with affectionate mockery, the way you might tease a child about a lemonade stand. Baplob was standing near the fireplace, wearing a tailored navy suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. He was laughing and talking animatedly with an older man, clearly the new client Mom had mentioned. The man turned when Baplob called out, "Sarah, come meet Mr. Jecky. He's thinking about marketing for his firm." I smiled and reached out my hand. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Jecky." He gave a polite nod, his eyes flicking over my simple dress and modest shoes. Plob tells me you do some computer work? He asked with the faintest trace of condescension. Yes, I said evenly. I run a small digital marketing agency. We build websites and handle online campaigns for businesses. Ah, he said, already half distracted. Well, keep at it. Everyone needs a hobby. Plob laughed, steering the conversation back toward legal matters. I didn't bother trying to explain myself. I'd learned long ago that people like Mr. Jecky only respected certain kinds of success, the kind they could easily understand. I slipped quietly into the kitchen, where Mom was orchestrating the dinner preparations with military precision. She didn't even look up when she handed me a stack of plates. Set the table for 8, she said. And just like that, I was back in my role, the quiet, agreeable daughter, the one who didn't quite fit but never made a fuss. What they didn't know, what none of them had ever cared enough to ask, was that I was far more successful than Plob, far more independent and far happier. But as I smoothed the tablecloth and arranged the silverware, I realized something. Keeping that secret was the best decision I had ever made. Use the everyday dishes for yourself, Mom said without even glancing in my direction. Save the good china for the important guests. Her tone made it clear I was not one of them. I didn't argue. Instead, I quietly followed her instructions, setting up the mismatched plates and dull silverware she had assigned for me at the far end of the long dining table, the same end where I had always sat, slightly out of view, far from where the serious conversations usually happened. The house smelled of roasted turkey and cinnamon, and every surface gleamed with her meticulous attention to detail. The polished floors, the centerpiece of autumn flowers, the neatly folded napkins. It was all perfect as always. Perfect except for the feeling that I didn't quite belong in any of it. Mom was directing everything with military precision when the doorbell rang. Moments later, my sister-in-law, Jennifer, swept in wearing a designer coat and carrying a tray of appetizers. Behind her trailed their 2 children, both impeccably dressed in coordinated outfits that probably cost more than my monthly utilities. Sorry we're late, Jennifer announced in her usual breathless tone. Traffic was terrible, and we had to stop by the tailor to pick up Plob's suit for the gala next week. Plob followed, placing a light kiss on her cheek before shaking hands with Mr. Jecky, his client, who was still lingering near the living room. Within minutes, Jennifer had launched into a detailed account of their latest trip to Europe. We just got back from Switzerland and France, she began proudly. Emma loved the Alps, and we've been visiting a few private schools for her. We're looking at Riverside Academy next. The tuition's steep, but Plob insists on the best education money can buy. Mom nodded approvingly, her eyes shining with pride. That's wonderful, Jennifer. Education is an investment. The best thing you can give a child. I smiled genuinely at my niece. That's amazing, Jen. Emma's such a bright little girl. She'll thrive anywhere. Well, not anywhere, Mom interjected, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. Some of us understand the importance of investing in quality education, instead of wasting money on frivolous things. Her eyes lingered on me for just a second too long. The words stung, even though I'd grown used to them. It was another reminder of how, in their eyes, my decision to attend a state university, graduating debt-free, had been a sign of mediocrity, not maturity. To them, financial independence meant nothing if it didn't come with a prestigious label. Dinner began and conversation flowed smoothly, for everyone but me. Plob dominated the table, talking about his latest high-profile case, and Jennifer chimed in with updates about the country club's upcoming holiday party. Mr. Jecky added occasional remarks about the luxury car market and investments, his voice deep and deliberate. I spoke when directly addressed but mostly listened, nodding politely, smiling when appropriate. It wasn't new. I was used to being treated as the one with little of value to add to discussions about real success. Halfway through the main course, Dad leaned toward Mr. Jecky and said with a chuckle, "Sarah's been trying to make this internet thing work for years now. We keep hoping she'll find something a bit more stable." Mr. Jecky gave a sympathetic nod. "Ah yes, the gig economy. My daughter went through a similar phase before she settled down with a real career." "Exactly," Mom said eagerly, pouring him another glass of wine. "We've tried to help her understand that playing around on computers isn't a sustainable lifestyle. But you know how young people are about facing reality." I cut another small bite of turkey and chewed quietly, keeping my smile neutral. "You're probably right," I said softly, letting the moment pass. If they only knew that the computer thing they dismissed so easily paid more than Baplob's lost salary and funded half of their recent home renovations. But I stayed silent. As dessert was served, pumpkin pie and whipped cream, store-bought just as Mom had ordered, the atmosphere began to shift. The wine had loosened everyone's tongues, especially Mom's. And then she said it. "You know what's really embarrassing?" she began suddenly, setting her glass down with a little too much force. "Having a 29-year-old daughter who can't even afford her own rent." The room fell silent. Jennifer's smile froze in place. Mr. Jecky busied himself with his pie. Baplob's hand tightened around his fork. "Mom," Baplob said gently, "maybe we don't need to." "No, it's fine," Mom interrupted, waving her hand dismissively. "Sarah knows we're just concerned about her future. Don't you, honey?" I looked up from my plate and met her slightly unfocused gaze. "Of course," I said quietly. She wasn't finished. "I mean, look at this situation objectively," she continued, gesturing around the table as if presenting evidence in court. "Baplob is supporting his family, buying a beautiful home, planning for his children's education. He contributes to this family, helps us when we need it." Her hand moved vaguely in my direction. "And then there's—" She didn't even finish the sentence. Dad stepped in smoothly. "What your mother is trying to say," he began, "is that we worry about your financial stability. You're living in that tiny apartment, driving that old car, working at this computer job that doesn't seem to offer any long-term security." Mom nodded solemnly. "We've offered to help you, Sarah. Baplob could probably get you an entry-level position at his firm, receptionist work, filing something stable, with benefits." For a moment no one spoke. The clink of silverware, the crackle of the fireplace, and the faint hum of the refrigerator were the only sounds. I looked down at my half-eaten pie, then up at the faces around me, all so certain they understood my life better than I did. And as the silence stretched, something in me began to shift. For years I had played the role they assigned to me. The struggling dreamer, the underachiever, the little girl who just needed guidance. But as I sat there, surrounded by people who measured worth in titles and possessions, I realized I didn't owe them my silence anymore. "That's very kind," I said evenly, keeping my voice calm. "I appreciate the concern." Mom's wine glass clinked softly against her plate as she set it down. "Do you though?" she asked, her tone rising slightly. "Because honestly, Sarah, it's getting embarrassing." The room seemed to freeze. She leaned forward, eyes narrowing in that familiar mix of frustration and pity. "When people ask about my children," she continued, "I can proudly talk about Baplob, his partnership track, his beautiful family, his success. But when they ask about you—" She let the sentence trail off with a helpless shrug, as if words failed her. Across the table, Mr. Jecky was now studying the swirl of whipped cream on his pie as though it held the secret to escape. Jennifer busied herself with cutting tiny, perfect bites for her kids, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Even Baplob looked uncomfortable, his jaw tightening slightly as he pushed his plate aside. Dad cleared his throat. "The truth is, sweetheart," he began, leaning forward with that expression he always used before delivering what he considered tough love. "You need to stop pretending to be successful and start taking concrete steps toward an actual career. Mom nodded quickly, seizing the moment. Exactly. You're 29 years old, Sarah. Most people your age have their lives figured out. They're not still playing around with hobby businesses or living like college students. Baplob finally spoke up, his tone gentle but firm. Maybe we could discuss this later. Privately. Why? Mom snapped, turning to him. Sarah's not a child. She can handle an honest conversation about her situation. Can't you, honey? I set my fork down carefully, feeling every pair of eyes on me. Then I looked directly at her and smiled. Absolutely, I said. I appreciate your honesty. For a moment, she seemed taken aback by my calmness. But then she recovered quickly, mistaking my composure for surrender. Good, she said, nodding approvingly. Because frankly, it's time you stopped pretending and acknowledged reality. You can't even afford your own rent without struggling. How embarrassing is that for the family? Her words floated in the air like smoke, thick, heavy, and impossible to ignore. No one moved. The only sound was the faint clatter of a fork against a plate as Jennifer's son dropped his utensil. Baplob stared down at his hands. Jennifer kept her eyes on the tablecloth. Mr. Jecky looked like he wished the floor would open up beneath him. I felt strangely calm. Years ago, those words would have broken me. But not now. Not after everything I'd built, in silence on my own terms. I picked up my glass of water and took a slow sip before answering. You're absolutely right, Mom, I said quietly. I should definitely face reality. Her brows lifted in surprise, caught off guard by my easy agreement. Well, good, she said after a moment. I'm glad you're finally ready to be realistic about your situation. Completely realistic, I confirmed, smiling slightly. Dad nodded approvingly, his tone softening. That's what we like to hear. Now about Baplob's offer. He might be able to help you get something at his firm. Maybe a receptionist position or an assistant role. Something steady. With benefits. I listened politely as they outlined their plan for my career rehabilitation. I nodded at all the right moments, murmured sounds of agreement when expected, and made sure my face remained neutral and calm. Mr. Jecky, sensing that the tension had eased, rejoined the conversation, turning to Baplob to discuss some new real estate development. Jennifer started talking about their Christmas plans at the country club. The laughter slowly returned to the room, tentative at first, then louder. By the time I helped clear the dishes, everything felt normal again, at least for them. Mom was humming softly as she loaded the dishwasher, clearly satisfied that she had finally gotten through to me. Dad gave me a proud little smile, the kind reserved for someone who had finally come to her senses. Even Baplob looked relieved, his eyes saying, "Thanks for not making a scene." I smiled at all of them, stacking the last of the plates neatly on the counter. Dinner was lovely, I said, meaning it in my own way. That night, I drove home through the quiet streets of the city. The houses grew smaller, then taller again as I entered the downtown district. The road sparkled faintly from the reflection of streetlights on the wet pavement. When I reached my building, the one they assumed was a rundown apartment complex, the doorman greeted me with a friendly nod. "Good evening, Ms. Walker," he said as he handed me a package that had arrived earlier. "Thanks, Daniel," I replied with a smile. I rode the private elevator up to the 24th floor. The moment I stepped into my loft, the city skyline greeted me through floor-to-ceiling windows. The morning sun hadn't risen yet, but the lights from the skyscrapers shimmered across the river like liquid gold. I set down my purse, slipped off my shoes, and walked barefoot across the warm hardwood floors. My laptop sat open on the sleek marble island, still displaying my company's analytics dashboard. Overnight, a client payment had come through. $87,500 for a new contract. Another deal closed. I smiled to myself, the faintest trace of amusement tugging at my lips. Yes, I thought. It's time to face reality. My reality. The reality they never saw. The sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, painting warm streaks across the polished concrete floors of my loft. The space was quiet, calm, a reflection of everything I had worked to build for myself. It was minimally furnished, but every detail had been chosen with intention. A soft gray sofa, a marble coffee table, a few pieces of art that reminded me of where I'd started. The exposed brick walls gave the apartment a sense of warmth, their renovation alone costing more than most people spent on a car. I loved the mix of modern and industrial, clean, efficient, quietly luxurious. It was the kind of home that didn't need to announce its worth. It simply existed with quiet confidence. As I sipped my coffee, I opened my laptop and glanced through the previous month's business reports. My agency's dashboard glowed across the screen. Rows of numbers that once would have made my parents' heads spin. Revenue was up 18% from the last quarter, driven mostly by 3 new corporate contracts, each of which paid more annually than Baplob earned at his prestigious law firm. The numbers were strong, the growth steady. My investment portfolio had just crossed another milestone, and my passive income streams now produced more each month than most people earned in a year. But that morning, it wasn't the success metrics that held my attention. It was something heavier, the quiet ache of last night's dinner, the weight of their words, the years of misunderstanding that had built a wall between us. I thought about the difference between having money and understanding money, about dignity, respect, and how easily people mistake appearances for truth. Then, after a long moment, I picked up my phone and dialed a familiar number. "Thank you for calling Wells Fargo. This is Rebecca. How can I help you today?" "Hi, Rebecca," I said calmly. "This is Sarah Chin. I need to cancel a recurring transfer from my business account." "Of course, Miss Chin. Can you verify your account information for me?" I provided the details, answering the security questions effortlessly. I had done this many times before. "I see the transfer you're referring to," Rebecca said after a moment. "The $4,800 monthly payment to account ending in 7834. This has been active for 36 months. May I ask the reason for the cancellation?" "The recipient no longer needs the assistance," I replied simply. "Understood," she said politely. "I'll process that cancellation immediately." The next scheduled transfer was set for December 1st, but that will now be stopped. "Is there anything else I can help you with today?" "That's everything. Thank you, Rebecca." When I hung up, the silence in the loft felt deeper somehow. Not empty, just full of meaning. I leaned back in my chair and looked out over the city skyline, where sunlight bounced off glass towers and drifted across the river. The world below moved on, unaware that one quiet phone call had just ended a 3-year secret. For 36 months, I had been quietly covering my parents' mortgage payments. Ever since Dad's early retirement had reduced their income, and Mom's spending habits had stayed exactly the same, I had stepped in. They never asked, but I noticed. The small changes. The way they stopped going out as much. The way they began to avoid talking about money at all. So I had done what felt right. Set up an anonymous transfer from an untraceable business account directly to their mortgage company. It wasn't about recognition, it was about love. 3 years of payments. $4,800 every month. $172,800 in total. Money that had quietly kept the roof over their heads, preserved their lifestyle, and allowed them to believe they were managing on their own. And through it all, I had listened to their lectures about financial stability, their endless advice about how I needed to grow up, get serious, and stop playing around on the computer. I had smiled through every conversation, every judgment, every condescending comment about my so-called hobby. Because dignity, I'd learned, doesn't always come from being understood. Sometimes it comes from knowing the truth and keeping it to yourself. My phone buzzed on the counter, snapping me out of my thoughts. A text from my assistant, Chloe. Chloe, the Henderson Industries contract is finalized. First payment of $85,000 hits Monday. Also, TechFlow wants to discuss a 6-month retainer. Estimated total $200,000. I smiled, typing back quickly. Me. Schedule the TechFlow call for Tuesday and push the Wilson meeting to next week. Got it, she replied instantly with a little thumbs-up emoji. I poured myself another cup of coffee and moved to the workstation near the window. The city shimmered beneath me as I pulled up the Morrison campaign. A new project that would bring in more revenue than my parents had paid for their entire house when they bought it 15 years ago. It was almost poetic in a way. Around noon, my phone started ringing again. Mom's name flashed across the screen. I stared at it for a moment, then let it ring out. She probably wanted to check in about last night, to make sure I was still being realistic about my career. The call went to voicemail. A minute later it rang again. Same name. Same ringtone. I sighed softly, my hand hovering over the phone before I finally let it go to voicemail once more. If she only knew. If any of them did. The call. By the third call, curiosity got the better of me. I sighed, picked up the phone and pressed accept. Sarah. My mother's voice came through, sharp, breathless, with an edge of panic that instantly pulled me upright. Thank goodness. I've been trying to reach you. My hand froze around my coffee cup. What's wrong? I asked, keeping my voice calm. I just got the strangest call from the mortgage company, she said quickly. They're saying our automatic payment was canceled. But that's impossible because we've never had automatic payments. Your father pays the mortgage by check every month. I set my coffee down carefully on the table. That does sound strange. It gets even weirder, she continued. The woman on the phone kept insisting that someone from our household called to cancel a monthly transfer. But your father never set up anything like that. We've always just mailed it in. I leaned back in my chair, eyes fixed on the window. I said, trying to sound casual. But here's the part that doesn't make any sense, Mom went on, her voice rising slightly. The payment they said was canceled was for $4,800. That's exactly what our mortgage payment is. How could some random automatic payment be for the exact same amount? That is odd, I said evenly. I know, she exclaimed. And now your father's on hold with them trying to figure out what happened. The customer service person told him the payments have been coming from a business account for the last 3 years. She lowered her voice a little, as if she couldn't believe what she was saying. But that makes no sense. What kind of business would just pay someone's mortgage for 3 years? In the background, I could hear Dad's voice. Raised, irritated, talking to someone on speakerphone. No authorization, he was saying. We never requested these transfers. You need to investigate this immediately. Mom sighed into the receiver. Sarah, this is really strange. And the timing, right after our talk yesterday about money and financial responsibility, it's just bizarre. Coincidences happen, I said softly, though my pulse was beginning to quicken. But $4,800, Sarah, every month? For 3 years. I could practically hear her doing the math. That's what, over $170,000? What kind of business pays that kind of money without saying anything? Dad's voice in the background was growing louder now, frustration turning into disbelief. I could hear him repeating words like fraud and unauthorized account. I spoke gently, cutting through the noise. Mom, maybe you and Dad should focus on figuring out what's next. How you'll handle the payments from here on. What do you mean? She asked, her tone wary. I mean, if someone's been helping with your mortgage and that help has now stopped, you'll need to make arrangements to cover it yourselves. There was a long silence. The kind of silence that stretches and hums, heavy with realization. I could almost hear her breathing as the pieces started to fall into place. Sarah, she said slowly, do you know something about this? I paused, then replied evenly, I know that mortgage payments don't make themselves, and if you've been getting help that you didn't know about, well, you'll need to plan accordingly now that it's ended. Another silence. Longer this time. I could faintly hear Dad's voice stop in the background. The room on their end had gone still. Sarah, Mom said again, even more quietly. This business account they mentioned, you don't think it could have been? Her voice trailed off. Could have been what? I asked, even though I already knew where this was heading. Well, you work with business accounts, right? With your computer company or whatever you do. I do, I said simply. And you'd know how to set up something like this, an automatic transfer or whatever it's called. That's a pretty basic banking function, Mom, I said softly. Most people could figure it out. For a moment, there was nothing but her breathing, shallow, uneven, like she was trying to hold on to a thought she didn't want to finish. Finally, her voice came through, almost a whisper. Sarah, she said, have you been paying our mortgage? I let the question hang in the air. My heart was steady now. Have I been paying your mortgage? I repeated, keeping my tone neutral. Don't play word games with me, she snapped suddenly, the fear in her voice giving way to anger. Just tell me the truth. I looked out the window, at the skyline, at the soft gray clouds moving slowly past the glass, and exhaled. Mom, I said quietly, the truth is, I've just been making sure you and Dad were okay. That's all. The truth comes out. Have you been sending money to our mortgage company? I took a slow sip of coffee, letting the question hang in the air. The morning sunlight reflected off the skyline outside my window, turning the city into a haze of golden glass. Mom, I said evenly, you told me yesterday that I can't even afford my own rent. So how could I possibly be paying someone else's mortgage? She started to respond, then stopped halfway through. But Sarah, if you were, hypothetically, if you had been. Mom, I interrupted gently, I think you should focus on what happens next, not what might have happened before. That afternoon my phone wouldn't stop ringing. First Mom, then Dad, then Mom again. I let most of the calls go to voicemail, but I listened to every single message. Sarah, we need to talk. The mortgage company confirmed that the payments were coming from a business called Chin Digital Solutions. That's your company, isn't it? Please call me back. Sarah, it's Dad. I've been looking at our bank statements and you're right, we never set up any automatic payments. Someone else was making them for us. We need to understand what's going on. Honey, please call me back. I think I understand now what you meant yesterday about facing reality. I think we need to have a very different conversation. By evening, after 6 unanswered calls, I finally picked up when Mom tried again. Sarah, she said the moment I answered. Her voice was soft, trembling. Please, we need to talk. I kept my tone calm. What would you like to discuss? You've been paying our mortgage, haven't you? She asked quietly. For 3 years. Mom, I said, you made it very clear yesterday that I can't even afford my rent. So how could I possibly be paying your mortgage? Sarah, please stop, she said, almost pleading now. I know it was you. The payments came from Chin Digital Solutions. That's your company. The payments started right after your father retired, when we were worried about making ends meet. You somehow found out and started paying for us. I let out a slow breath. That would be very generous of someone who can't afford her own rent. Sarah. Her voice was small now, fragile. Gone was the sharp, confident tone from the night before. I owe you an apology. For what? I asked softly. For everything I said yesterday. For all the times I made assumptions about you. For treating you like a disappointment when you were the one taking care of us. I didn't say anything right away. I let the silence do its work. Mom, I said finally, what's your mortgage payment going to be next month? $4,800, she said quietly. And do you and Dad have $4,800 to pay it? There was a long pause. We're not sure, she admitted. We'll have to look at our budget. Maybe make some changes. What kind of changes? I don't know yet, she said, her voice breaking slightly. Cut back on some expenses. Maybe refinance. We'll figure something out. Her voice trailed off as the full weight of reality began to settle in. Mom, I said gently, when you were lecturing me about financial responsibility yesterday, were you able to make your mortgage payment without help? No, she whispered. And when you said it was embarrassing to have a daughter who can't afford rent, were you paying your own bills? Another pause. No. So when you told Mr. Jecky that I was the one in the family who couldn't contribute anything meaningful, I let the words hang for a beat. What exactly were you contributing? Silence. Only her breathing on the line. Finally she spoke, her voice small and uneven. Sarah, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. Why didn't you tell us? Tell you what? I said quietly. That while you were publicly humiliating me for being financially irresponsible, I was privately covering your financial irresponsibility. We weren't being irresponsible, she said quickly. Your father's retirement income just turned out to be lower than we expected. And with inflation. Mom, I cut in gently. There's nothing wrong with needing help. Everyone struggles sometimes. But there is something wrong with needing financial help while lecturing other people about financial responsibility. She didn't answer. I could tell she was crying now, quietly trying not to let me hear. A week of realizations. Over the next week, the truth of my parents' situation slowly started to sink in, for them at least. Without the mysterious mortgage payments they had unknowingly been receiving for 3 years, they were suddenly short almost $5,000 every month. By Tuesday, Dad called. His voice was tired but calm, like someone trying to sound in control while the ground was shifting beneath him. Sarah, we've been going through our finances with a fine-tooth comb, he said. Without that mortgage payment, we can't make ends meet. What are your options? I asked. We're not sure yet, he admitted. Maybe we could take out a home equity loan to cover the difference, or look into refinancing. But our income-to-debt ratio isn't great for getting approved. What about cutting expenses? I asked. We're looking at that too, he said. Your mom's already talking about canceling some subscriptions and cutting back on groceries. But even with significant cuts, we're still short. I hesitated before asking the next question. What about getting help from Baplob? He seems to be doing well financially. Dad sighed. We talked to him about it. He's willing to help some, but $4,800 a month is beyond what he can manage with his own mortgage and the kids' expenses. I see, I said quietly. There was a pause. Then he spoke again, his tone shifting, softer, more hesitant. Sarah, I know we have no right to ask, especially after how we treated you. But is there any way you could continue helping us? Maybe we could work something out, pay you back when we're in a better position. I was sitting in my office at that moment, reviewing a new contract proposal worth more than their entire house. The irony wasn't lost on me. Dad, I said slowly, remember what Mom said last week? About how I can't even afford my own rent. Sarah, please, he said quickly. We know we were wrong. We're sorry. I know you're sorry, I replied. But being sorry doesn't fix the fundamental problem. What problem? He asked, confusion mixing with guilt. The problem, I said carefully, is that for 3 years, You've been getting financial help that you never acknowledged, never appreciated, and didn't even recognize. And during that same time, you were criticizing the person who was providing that help for being financially irresponsible. There was silence on the line. We didn't know it was you, he said quietly. You didn't want to know, I corrected. But you knew someone was helping, didn't you? The math had to make sense somehow. Your expenses were being covered by income you didn't actually have. He was quiet again for a long moment before saying softly, we thought maybe my pension was higher than we realized, or that we were just managing better than expected. Dad, I said gently, did you really think you'd somehow become better at managing money? Or did you just not want to look too closely at how the numbers were working out? This time there was no answer, only a quiet, heavy silence. The truth is, I continued, you were happy to accept help as long as you didn't have to acknowledge it or feel grateful for it. The moment you realized that your daughter was the one supporting you financially, suddenly it became a problem. There was nothing left to say after that. He just muttered a quiet, I understand, before ending the call. By Friday, Boplop called. Sarah, he said as soon as I picked up, we need to talk about Mom and Dad. What about them? I asked. They're panicking about the mortgage situation, he said. They've asked me to help, but honestly, I can't cover $4,800 a month on top of my own expenses. Jennifer and I ran the numbers. It's just not feasible long term. That sounds like a difficult position, I said, keeping my tone neutral. Sarah, I know what you did, Boplop said quietly. I know you've been paying their mortgage for 3 years. Did they tell you that? I asked. They didn't have to. Chin Digital Solutions, the business account, the timing, it's obviously you. I didn't respond. He continued. My point is that you're clearly in a position to help them, and they desperately need it. I leaned back in my chair, looking out over the skyline through my office window. Boplop, I said calmly, just because I can help doesn't mean I have to. The conversation with Boplop. Boplop, I said, at Thanksgiving dinner, when Mom was publicly humiliating me about my financial situation, what did you say? He hesitated. I told her maybe we should discuss it privately. But you didn't correct her, I said. You didn't tell her she was wrong about me, did you? I didn't know about your finances, he replied quietly. Come on, Boplop, I said, my voice calm but firm. You knew I wasn't living like someone who was struggling to pay rent. You've been to my apartment, you know it's in an expensive area. You've seen how I dress when I want to. You knew I was running a business that was clearly doing well. He paused, fumbling for words. I guess I just thought. You thought what was convenient to think, I interrupted. Just like Mom and Dad. You all believed the version of me that made you feel comfortable. Sarah, that's not fair, he said defensively. What's not fair, I said evenly, is sitting quietly while your parents publicly shame your sister for being financially irresponsible when she's been secretly paying their mortgage for 3 years. Boplop was silent for a long time. Then quietly he said, You're right. I should have spoken up. Yes, I said. You should have. But they really do need help now, he added. And I really needed help that night, I said softly. Support isn't something you only give when it's convenient. It's something you give because it's the right thing to do. He sighed. So what happens now? They lose the house, I said simply. He sounded shocked. Sarah, what do you mean? What I mean, I said, is that they finally have to face the same financial reality that every other adult faces, that your expenses can't be higher than your income. But you could help them, he said. I could, I agreed. But the real question is, should I? Because help is something you give to people who respect you, not to people who don't. Baplob didn't answer. And maybe for the first time he really understood what I meant. The email. That weekend I made a decision. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop and began typing. The words came slowly at first, but then flowed easily, clear, calm and final. Subject: mortgage assistance and future plans. Mom, Dad and Baplob, I want to be clear about the situation going forward. For the past 3 years, I have been making your mortgage payments from my business account. This was not a loan, it was a gift, given out of love and respect for you as my parents. The total amount was $245,100. I stopped making these payments because on Thursday night, you made it clear that you view me as a financial burden and an embarrassment to the family. You specifically said that I can't afford my own rent, and that my lifestyle is unrealistic and unsustainable. I realized that continuing to financially support people who have such a low opinion of my financial capabilities would be inconsistent with your assessment of my situation. Going forward, you will need to make arrangements to cover your mortgage payments yourselves. If you need help understanding your options, I recommend speaking with a financial advisor or credit counselor. I wish you the best in resolving your financial situation. Sarah. I read the email 3 times before hitting send. It was professional. It was calm. And it was final. The calls. 20 minutes later, my phone started ringing. The first voicemail was from Mom. Sarah, please, we can work this out. We understand now how wrong we were. Please call us back. The second was from Baplob. Sarah, this is crazy. They're your parents. You can't just cut them off like this. The third was from Dad. Sarah, I'm begging you. We made a mistake. We're sorry. Please don't punish us for one bad evening. I listened to all 3, then turned off my phone and made myself dinner. For the first time in years, the silence in my apartment felt peaceful, not lonely. New beginnings. Spring arrived early that year. From my office window, I could see the trees along the riverfront beginning to bud, the first signs of a new season. It felt symbolic, like my life was entering a new chapter too. The Henderson Industries campaign had exceeded every expectation. That success led to 3 new corporate contracts and a referral network that practically doubled my business overnight. For the first time in a long time, I felt free, not just financially but emotionally. I had finally stopped paying for peace that I never truly had. And in doing so, I finally found it. A year later. A year had passed since that Thanksgiving dinner, the night everything changed. My business, Chin Digital Solutions, had grown faster than I ever expected. I had hired 2 full-time employees and moved into a larger office space in the same building. The walls were bright, the view was open, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was building something that truly belonged to me. My parents had managed to keep their house, but just barely. They had refinanced at a higher interest rate, taken out a home equity loan, and cut back on nearly everything. Mom had started working part-time at a small boutique downtown. Dad picked up some consulting work for his old company. Baplob helped with about $500 a month. Not much, but it was what he could afford while raising his kids. We had spoken twice since Thanksgiving. Once in January, when Mom called to say they'd figured out their finances and didn't need my help anymore. And once in March when Dad called to tell me he was proud of what I'd built, that he and Mom hoped someday we could repair our relationship. Both conversations were polite and careful. They felt like conversations with acquaintances, not parents. There were no arguments anymore, but there wasn't warmth either. I wasn't angry. Anger takes energy I no longer had for that kind of relationship. Instead, I felt something closer to indifference. And somehow that felt even heavier. A different kind of lesson. That distance taught me something I hadn't expected. I used to believe that love and support were unconditional. That family meant standing by each other no matter what. But now I understood something deeper. Love without respect isn't real support. I could still love my parents. I always would. But I couldn't keep helping people who didn't respect me. Not financially and not emotionally. Respect, I learned, wasn't optional. It was essential. The call from Jennifer. One Thursday afternoon in April, my phone rang. The name surprised me, Jennifer. Baplob's wife almost never called me directly. Sarah, she said when I answered. I hope you don't mind me calling out of the blue. Not at all, I said. Is everything okay? Yes, she said softly. Actually, I wanted to thank you. For what? I asked. For what you taught our family about respect. I didn't say anything. I just listened. Baplob told me everything, she continued. About the mortgage payments, about how you've been helping his parents for years without saying a word. And I realized something. We were all making the same mistake. What mistake? I asked quietly. We took your kindness for weakness, she said. Your generosity for inability. Your silence for failure. Jennifer. I started, but she interrupted me gently. Let me finish. Last week, Emma asked why Aunt Sarah doesn't come to family dinners anymore. And I realized I didn't have a good answer. Not one that didn't make us all look awful. I couldn't help but smile a little. So what did you tell her? I told her that sometimes adults make mistakes. Mistakes that hurt the people they love. And sometimes those mistakes have consequences that last longer than we expect. That's a good lesson for a 5-year-old, I said. Jennifer laughed softly. It's a good lesson for all of us. Then she paused. Sarah, Baplob and I would really like to invite you to dinner. Just us and the kids. No drama. No awkward conversations. Just a simple family dinner. I thought about it for a long moment before answering. I'd like that. Good, she said. And Sarah, what you did, stopping the payments, making them face the truth, it was the right thing to do. They needed to understand what they had lost. What everyone learned. After we hung up, I sat by the window in my office, looking out at the city. The afternoon light glowed across the skyline, reflecting off the river like glass. Jennifer was right, there were lessons here for everyone. For my parents, the lesson was about gratitude and respect, and the difference between truly supporting someone and just depending on them. For Baplob, the lesson was about courage, about standing up for the people who deserve support, even when it's uncomfortable. And for me, the lesson was about boundaries and self-respect, about understanding that helping people isn't the same as letting them take advantage of you. But maybe the most important lesson of all was this. Financial support without emotional support is just a business transaction. And business transactions can be canceled at any time. A new beginning. I picked up my phone and called Jennifer back. How does Saturday evening sound for dinner? I asked. Perfect, she said. I'll make Emma's favorite pasta. Thanks, Jennifer, I said quietly. For understanding. She smiled through the phone. No, Sarah. Thank you for teaching us. After I hung up, I looked out at the river again. For the first time in a long time, I felt peace. Some relationships couldn't be repaired, and some boundaries couldn't be undone. But some could, and sometimes that was enough.